fasting. This is a very, very hot topic. Different forms of fasting, intermittent fasting, alternate day fasting, 5-2 fasting. It's all the rage. Fasting mimicking diet, made well known by Dr. Longo. All of this is based on very, very little research versus the hype. The hype is high, the research is early preliminary, and there are some major problems that are commonly not discussed. If it was using common sense, that fantastic and that particularly amazing, wouldn't it already catch like wildfire and the diabetes and metabolic tsunami epidemics disappear? Of course they would, and that means that there is no magic involved. The body doesn't just burn carbs or just burn fats or protein. In fact, it burns a fuel mixture. And sure enough, if you cut calories and you cut carbs, it is thought that you will deplete glycogen and then body will start to burn fat, as if that's the only way to burn fat. That is not the case. The body burns a ratio of carbs and fat all the time. So intermittent fasting may work for some people, may work some of the time temporarily, but as far as long-term blue zones, it's healthy carbs along with modest amounts of calories overall with movement and having your mind matters in place that ultimately works. Don't put too much weight into, no pun intended, into these fad intermittent fasting keto approaches. You know what's best. This is where reality meets science.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Dr. Sal, the Lifestyle Medicine Institute CHIP Medical Director. I want to welcome everyone to the program today, and we have another exciting program today. We were on line before. Obviously, Dr. Rifai is going to be joining us in a little bit, but we were talking about exciting presentations and discussions that we've had in the past. I think this is going to be just as exciting. Very humorous. Tom is a wonderful guy to talk to, and I'm really going to be looking forward to chatting with him in a few minutes. So the topic is excellence. So many people talk to us about the topic of fasting and how that relates to the CHIP program and everything we do in LMI. But let me give you a little bit of background about Dr. Rifai before he comes on the screen. He is the founder of Reality Meets Science, and I actually love this term because what we really have to do and what it is so important for us to all do is make sure that we focus on the science as we educate ourselves, as we take care of our patients, as we talk in the public eye. Dr. Rifai was an honored fellow of the American College of Physicians, and he was honored for his excellence in teaching patients, medical students, and physicians the art of lifestyle medicine and preventing disease through behavior modification. This is something that we really focus on. And how do we get people to really change their behavior so they change their health and their lifestyle? He is board certified through the American Board of Internal Medicine and the National Board of Physician Nutrition Specialists. He recently passed the inauguration certification exam for ABLM, the American Board of Lifestyle Medicine. Dr. Rifai is a highly respected public and motivational speaker serving on the Speakers Bureau for the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, which many of us are a part of. He's provided continuing medical education for healthcare professionals as a course director for the Harvard Medical School's online lifestyle medicine course on the prevention of type 2 diabetes, one of the big pandemics that we all deal with on a regular basis. He actually served 2 terms on the board of directors for the National Board of Physician Nutrition Specialists and was unanimously elected as their president in his final term. What a great honor. Prior to going full-time with Reality Meets Science, he served as the Regional Medical Director of Metabolic Health and Weight Management for the world-renowned Henry Ford System in Michigan. They actually continue to license his program, his behavior management program, and at some point in the next year or so, he's going to be putting out a book on it's called The 5 Keys to Optimal Wellness, Weight Loss, and Disease Prevention. So I am honored to ask Dr. Rifai to come on the screen and talk to us more about lifestyle medicine and fasting. Hello, Dr. Rifai. Hello, Tom. How are you, sir?
Dr. Sal, it's a pleasure to be here, and so much. I am so appreciative of you having me here. Thank you so much.
This is great. This is great. Thank you for taking the time out. So let's tell the audience, a lot of people have already joined from literally all over the world, and we actually have people from this country and other places. that are anxious to know what's the deal about fasting and optimal wellness.
Well, there's certainly a lot to say. It's a hot topic, right? I mean, really
yes, it
hot.
is.
It seems like we're always fishing for something to help get us out of a mess or answer a question and help us improve our health. So it's a very legitimate topic to discuss. And I don't think there's any reason we shouldn't just dive right into it. Yep. And I think the opening gave my perspective in a sense that says a bottom line, but I'll reiterate it and maybe add some nuance. First of all, we're not talking about religious fasting for spiritual issues in which that is completely and absolutely separate and honorable issue. Mm-hmm. And we're not also going to claim that there aren't any potentially conceptual benefits. There are potential benefits, I do believe. Mm-hmm. One of my biggest issues, though, and you know this because you know me personally, having binge eating disorder myself and now having really learned to manage it well, but having lost my younger brother to it, any approach that deals with eating outside of hunger, in other words, may allow someone to not eat when they're hungry, or maybe eat more than they otherwise would when not hungry. And you can imagine, my window's about to close at 6 o'clock. I better get everything I can in before tomorrow. Exactly. And the other end, I'm really hungry right now, but my window's closed and I'm rolling around in bed and I'm going to try to get to sleep despite my being hungry, really can aggravate binge eating. And a lot of what people are looking for, not all the time, is some weight management. And we know at least 30% of people that are seeking weight management help have binge eating to some degree or another, or tendencies to really bring on the risk of maladaptive eating by not listening to the simple concept of when you're hungry, eat, stop when comfortably full, or they might say in Okinawa, harahachi bu, right?
Right.
Until you're 80% full.
Yeah.
And that is the real issue. At the end of the day, the best data that I see is that it is what we eat, not when we eat, that's most important. Mm-hmm. Although when we eat is largely best driven by biological drives for hunger. The problem in the United States is that on the other end of artificially imposing time restricted feeding is this constant onslaught of being fed everything every time. It's going to be look, Golden Arches is just one. It's just everywhere. We are in a tsunami of if you will, CRAP, which is just an acronym for calorie rich and processed, coined by Jeff Novick, I will say. Processed food like products and beverages everywhere. So it's not as if people are already, hey, we're just only eating based on hungry until comfortably full. We're on one end of the spectrum. I'm just not so sure, based on a really, I would say, sober analysis of published data, which may not be what filters through to the hype of intermittent fasting, where we see people suffering fatigue and nausea and headaches, that the data on it is as bright and shiny for many, many people as what is interpreted as what could be, really another kind of quick fix tool. In my clinical practice, I'll leave it at this before handing the baton back, is I've actually tried. Patients want to try, and I am a coach. I am not a pilot. I am a navigator like yourself. We talked about this. We are DOC, not GOD.
Right.
So if somebody wants to start, there's many ways to kickstart. I've had people who just insisted on starting with me and starting with keto. And while I don't, frankly, as a flexitarian, think of that as a long-term approach, I embrace the willingness to start changing in any way, and then we can talk about the long run later. So we've tried it, and from 5-2 to time-restricted feeding, any different form of time-restricted feeding, I've generally just not even found motivated people able to, where reality meets science, as we say in the name of my company, really sustain it. I found short-term benefits, but you find all the things we were just talking about. I was really hungry. I didn't know what to do at a party. I have life got in the way. I have to make food for my family, and here I'm exposed to all this food. I'm supposed to be in a window. It just doesn't seem to jibe with the reality in most cases.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and I like the fact that you really differentiate the hype and the myths versus the reality and the science. And you know, as educators, we all really have to look at what is the reality of what we're doing based on the science, which should be our foundation. So I like always getting back to that point. And you really also refer to the fact that, you know, with the patients that we see and the clients that we work with, we have to figure out what people are ready to do, not necessarily what we're ready to tell them, but what they're actually ready to do. And, you know, becoming a good healthcare provider, you really have to be able to understand where your patient's at so that you can really move them along the spectrum, if you will. But, you know, when you talk about fasting and when we talk about nutrition and when we speak even more, you know, succinctly about eating more fruits and vegetables and really eating less processed and less crap food, as you say, and I love that term. So often the issue comes up, well, what about being undernourished? What about protein? What about being able to build muscle? How do you respond to your clients in that regard?
Yeah, the protein question is I think a really important one, because truth be told, many, not all, you know, many of the clients and patients that we've seen are seeking some degree of body leanness, if you will, and weight loss. And there is good evidence that it's, you know, protein is probably the calorie you want to reduce the least as you're trying to reduce energy stores on your body, aka fat, and therefore try to minimize it, particularly processed forms of carbohydrate and fats. But that being said, there's also a myth of how much protein is required to do that. It's not a lot. Right. I do think we also have to look at beyond protein effect on muscle mass per se, overall benefits in terms of health. In other words, something that has a significant amount of protein, but also is going to be cholesterol raising, high in saturated fat, and let alone the amount of energy it requires to produce that protein in terms of carbon emissions. You know, we really have to look at beans and legumes as a particular kind of trifecta. I mean, you've got the protein in there, you've got the fiber, and the fact it's cooked in water means it's low in calorie concentration. It's got a lot of water weight. Now, I'm a flexitarian. I am very clear that I'm not plant pure. I'm plant predominant flexitarian. And I would say there's also, in terms of satiety, beyond the protein signaling potentially some significant differences in terms of hunger hormone suppression, that the way that I tend to look at the fraction of what we eat in terms of animal sources of protein, try to make a number of things meet. Number one, I do believe that if you're going to talk about flesh, really fish is the flesh of choice, and you really should seek out sustainable forms, even sardines. I know people are probably at this point rolling their eyes that I'm talking about sardines. But you know what? They are a sustainable small feeder fish. They're high in omega-3. They're small. They have the vitamin D. They're low in saturated fat, and they're more sustainable. Of course, there's variations in even sardine populations, but nevertheless, overall, and they're not as salty as commonly as anchovies, which are also great. But I don't know if you look at these cans of anchovies, and I try to find fresh. It's very rare. I've got a fish dealer nearby that occasionally can get them. It's really packed in a lot of salt, and that is just not going to be for metabolic health that particularly great, sadly. And then there are other sources, and I do recommend using something like the Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Watch app or others to try to hone in on the most sustainable forms. Right. And then remember the portions that people need. We're not talking about bodybuilders here. This kind of discussion about these exceptions. Generally speaking, 3 to 4 ounces has got plenty, especially if you're talking about accentuating with lentils and beans, and you can really get plenty of all the protein you need, and what is probably a portion that is half or less of what a typical American would eat. Even a petite fillet is often a half pound, right? 8 ounces. Right, exactly. Right. Petite fillet. Right. That is more protein than your body can really process. And there is an issue that excessive amounts of branched chain amino acids that are particularly rich in animal proteins may have a particular insulin resistance promoting effect in muscle. So there's a balance. You don't want to lose muscle because that's insulin resistance promoting, but you don't want to overload on animal sources of protein that can trigger through branched chain amino acids, particularly valine, an insulin resistance response in the muscle. So egg whites, I do use them. I tend to, some low-fat, fat-free Greek yogurts. Fish is some, not organic, non-salt injected chicken, but it's really kind of it's the garnish where what I was had before we started is in a big, huge pot of broccoli and cauliflower, and and an orange for dessert. Which, by the way, fresh fruit is the dessert of choice among these blue zones that we talked about.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. Right. Exactly. Yeah. The protein issue, comes up, and I'm sure that you've watched Game Changers, like so many of us have, and it's really interesting when Schwarzenegger says in the beginning of the program, what people hear is myth. It's not based in reality. It's not based in science. And obviously, this was a guy that. I think he says in the movie that he ate like 220 grams of protein a day.
Oh yeah,
which is bizarre.
To be honest, back in a crazy time. As a matter of fact, when I was in competitive bodybuilding myself, I used a Pritikin type approach, which is, and we see a question here about whole food plant-based, which is, I think, a question as to whether I'm absolutely plant pure. And no, I'll say again, I am, I would say, minimally processed plant predominant flexitarian, but there were a lot of anabolic steroids going on in Arnold's early life, and he's pretty much clearly said that. And that's that exceptional kind of discussion. But even then, he probably could have built the same amount of muscle with 30-40% less with healthy sources of carbohydrate, which cannot be compared to processed carbohydrate. Right. You can't compare jelly bean and navy bean. They are completely different animals. Did I just say that? I'm sorry. Like that. No pun intended. They are different in calorie density. They're different in fiber. They're different in micronutrients of potassium and magnesium. They're completely different. You can't just say carbs. The data is clear. There's minimally processed carbs. We're talking about whole grains, preferably intact, but generally speaking, whole grains, beans, lentils, peas, tubers, those sources, eaten in the proper amounts because of their calorie density, usually don't overdo it, can spare protein for its use rather than trying to run fuel as protein. Because if you run fuel as protein, you're going to end up with some of the issues of excess protein intake, such as insulin resistance, and of course, what comes with the package. Most people aren't eating up their animal protein from, Ornish or Pritikin approved egg whites and low fat or fat free yogurts. They're talking about a lot of flesh, and they're eating a lot. Right. The satisfaction though part, the satiety part is not of the journey of lifestyle is not always about, the physiological effects though. There is a certain amount of satiety of what just people enjoy. You mentioned readiness for change. If someone's willing to go from a 16-ounce porterhouse to a 6-ounce filet, I'm gonna consider that a win.
That's a win, right?
The body generally burns on, other than extreme scenarios, a mixture of fuels. It's not almost ever burning one thing or another until you get to some extreme scenario that begs the question of whether it's sustainable. So to get into a ketosis, you're generally in such a severe case of breaking down fat that you're getting an overload that can't be processed, and ketones are building up. The truth is, though, that to get to that state, most people are not, although it's possible to do a plant predominant or even plant pure form of keto, let's be honest, it's not what people are really doing. They're generally running on high amounts of processed, high sodium, high saturated fat, and often high cholesterol foods. So whatever benefits you get in terms of reduction in weight and insulin sensitivity, you may compromise in the long run with that high protein intake, but also are usually getting less of a blood pressure benefit with your weight loss because of all the salt, and maybe none, maybe even a worsening of your lipids. And that, to me, begs the question of responsibility. Now, if we tell people that's the risk and they're willing to take it, again, we are navigators, we're not pilots. We've given them the information. We said these are the risks. And then we have to preserve our own energy and realize that we are, again, DOC, not GOD.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And it's interesting when people look at, keto diets and South Beach diets and the standard American diets. I think laying out the science and just helping people really understand all of these different programs, the goal really is to not necessarily just to do weight management, it's really to do health management. And I think we're in the business of helping people become and stay healthy. that really is our goal, And I always ask, when I was the medical director for our group, I would always ask our doctors, how do you know if you're doing a good job? And I think the question is, how do you explain to me that your patients are getting healthier? If you can help your patients get healthier, then I think you're doing a good job in combination with people. So I think that's part of our goal. You talked about, you really referenced, the whole scenario of metabolic diseases and all of the lifestyle related diseases that we deal with. So when you talk about heart disease and diabetes and weight, so on and so forth, how do you really educate your patients on the fact that these are all lifestyle related diseases, but they're also treated with lifestyle? How do you switch their mindset in that approach?
Generally speaking, I think that the people that I end up seeing, and maybe in the context of the lifestyle program you are they're already in a sense somewhat pre-selected for level of motivation, as opposed to the challenge of pure primary care, which I was trained in and I have a lot of sympathy for. So it's not much of a stretch to get them to buy into at least those types that are in the readiness stage. You're referring to the stages of readiness, where we're seeing people that are really prepared, or they're even in action phase, and they're seeing us to turbo boost the discussion that really lifestyle is the king of all medicines. And the fact is, probably even up to 90, at least 80% of type 2 diabetes could be never happen, or at least delayed until the very end of life, such that health span is really extended, and it's a very small period of time. I would say it's almost similar for heart disease as far as what number of cases could be prevented. And there's building evidence that the link between all of these, the cardiometabolic link, and there's more than one, but let's say, for instance, insulin resistance being one factor, and inflammation, and, lipids and sodium and so forth, but that the list includes dementia and many, if not all, but many cancers. Right. Atrial fibrillation, obviously fatty liver disease. In many cases of cancers, fatty liver is excess calories on the liver. Foie gras is really, and that's what it is right up there with alcohol and hepatitis C as far as the risk of liver cancer. Right. All of these things are avoidable. The thing is what we get to offer, I think, more and more now, is that the answer is very simple. The issue is, it's not simple and easy are two different things. If your friend is stuck under a car, it's not very complicated. You better find 8 or 9 strong people and lift the damn car. Right. You don't need an MD or a PhD or physics formulas. It doesn't make it easy, but it's not complicated. It's very, very straightforward. So the issue really comes down a lot to people's levels of readiness for change and what they're willing to do. But convincing people that lifestyle is powerful, simply looking at blue zones and describing how these populations, disparate as they are, right? I mean, from Okinawa to Costa Rica, and even our own in Loma Linda, right? Forget it. It's not a genetic thing. Sorry. I mean, we got Caucasians, African Americans, Asians, Latinos, and they all tend to have a life expectancy about 10 years longer. Right. So much for that it's genetic. It's not. If someone from Okinawa who I mean, I wouldn't say unfortunately moves here, but if they move here, they tend to end up having the same disease issues, unless they really are, maybe they're older and they've had their behavior embedded in them and they'll really stick with it. But even as I understand it, due to the environmental changes in Okinawa, maybe largely driven by our military presence and fast food, those under the age of 50 in Okinawa are some of the unhealthiest Japanese versus those over 70 or 80, where still have that hara hachibu and ikigai type lifestyle. Yeah. So,
and for the people that don't know those terms, and for the individuals that have not actually read any of the Blue Zone information, it really is amazing. And as you mentioned, these are places that are geographically distant. So what is it about all of these places? What's the common denominator? And, the way they present it, there's about 9 different things that all of these people do to stay healthy. And again, it's not about genetics. I like Susan's question here. We're going to get to some of the questions. How does fasting affect cancer? Mm-hmm. And, right now, cardiovascular disease is still the #1 killer. Cancer is #2. and really biting on the heels of cardiovascular disease. The pandemic is unfortunately number 3. But how do you know about fast? What do you know about fasting and cancer?
Mm-hmm. Well, I will say, first of all, there's context, correct? So one of my family members just had a gastrectomy for stomach cancer. Clearly, we do not want him fasting during chemotherapy, right? We're trying to.
Right.
So I think the question is how does nutrition and maybe fasting as a way of a lifestyle help with reducing the risk of cancer? I will say that in overall, to kind of step back, there is nothing I think that has been more clearly proven all the way up to mammalian data in primates like monkeys to prolong life and delay disease at the very least, because we had 2 different groups, the NIH primates and then the University of Wisconsin primates, then calorie reduction. The thing is, how do you get there? You can't really starve yourself per se. If somebody has the genetic luck of the draw, maybe a mutation to not be the common human that is a hunter-gatherer in a sense and seeks out food, there is no question that reducing calorie intake and food intake while still maintaining optimal nutrition can reduce the risk of cancer. If you look at insulin, for instance, insulin resistance is more linked to breast cancer and I'd say colon cancer than weight per se. Now, obviously, insulin resistance and weight are highly correlated, but if you're a normal weight individual who may not necessarily have an ideal body composition, of course, because if you've lost 15 pounds of muscle and gained 15 pounds of fat over 15 years, the scale is just a useful idiot that can't tell you the difference and says you weighed the same as you did 15 years ago.
Right.
You have insulin levels that are high. A wonderful hormone, but in excess, it's a growth promoter, and it seems to be a promoter of cancer cells. Controlling calorie intake is the most powerful way to lower your overall requirement for insulin. Not only that, preventing the potential burnout of insulin production by the pancreas and then giving you type 2 diabetes, but prior to that, you may end up succumbing or not succumbing to an insulin-sensitive cancer, of which there are many. It seems insulin sensitivity is also behind dementia, and it's a player, at least in terms of cardiovascular disease, because high insulin levels tend to make the body more sodium sensitive. Your blood pressure goes up. It tends to drive down the size of LDL particles. So even at the same amount of LDL cholesterol, your LDL particle number will go up. So those particles bury themselves into the wall of your arterial system. So I would say that the role of fasting, if it can be a method that will allow you long-term success in reducing non-essential calorie intake, is going to be beneficial. But it's reducing that non-essential calorie intake that is the ultimate goal. However you do it. I think that that would be my my answer. I also want to, I think, maybe take a moment to say that in the same sense of what we were discussing about finding people where they live, I am a big supporter of any pattern of lifestyle change that shifts towards the healthier. And in particular, we're talking about food here, but I mean, if someone were to start with physical activity or even standing during a podcast like we are here instead of sitting, not that we're looking for credit, but that would be a plus. But one of the issues that I've come up against a lot, and I have to say, I think I saw a comment, I want to try to address it, is one in which we have different kind of nutrition approaches that have far less distinction and difference between them than any do versus the standard American diet. I mean, the SAD, or what I call the crap SAD. Right. So I take Jeff Novick's crap, and then I think it was, nobody yet has been able to confirm to me who really coined SAD. I think SAD was coined by C. Everett Koop. That's my best guess, our former Surgeon General. I still don't know. We have to look that up. But crap SAD is way out here in terms of calorie density, sodium, low fiber, low potassium, all the features that may have immediate pleasure principle, but have a balloon mortgage risk. Right. And versus any pattern that you look at that's reasonably defined, not the restaurant version of Mediterranean, but medical Mediterranean, not the pop culture version of paleo with all this meat, but the 80 to 100 grams of fiber, plant predominant version of paleo. It's a healthy plant pure, if you will, vegan, flexitarian, DASH, Pritikin. All of these I put into my presentation at the American College of Lifestyle Medicine in 2000, I think it was 17, and a CME I've given elsewhere called Diet Wars, a tour of duty from vegan to paleo. Again, all of these defined in a proper way, not the pop culture, but are pure to plant predominant. Anywhere in that zone, if somebody's on SAD, is making a move in the right direction for the earth, making the right move for themselves, their family, their why, their purpose. So I know that some of us may have a center where we live that is maybe different than what our another program does, but we're really all on the same page as far as I'm concerned. We need to align, from flexitarians to healthy vegans, whole food plant pure to whole minimally processed plant predominant. They're all much more similar to each other than any are to that other thing.
Yeah, exactly. I encourage a lot of my patients and even friends and family not necessarily to label themselves as from any particular form of eating, if you will, but just to find healthy food. As you mentioned before, healthy food is high in nutrition, it's low in calories, it's high in fiber, it's all the stuff that we should be eating so that our bowels move every day and we don't have heart disease and we lower our risk of cancer and all. And Nadine put a question in the chat here. I've been encouraging beans for my patients, but diabetics are very concerned about the carbs. They feel that beans always increase their blood sugar. So, that's where the hype and the myth has to be put aside, and people really need to understand, as you just mentioned, beans instead of beef. And I like that you mentioned navy beans instead of jelly beans.
Well, that's the big one, right? So there, let's give some light to the concern of type 2 diabetics.
Right.
The irony is that it's sadly a lifetime of eating a high amount of processed carbohydrate that may require and necessitate or make it reasonable to temporarily reduce carbohydrate intake and maybe focus more on the low starch vegetables for a time period to bring insulin sensitivity back. But it's not because your life started with beans and whole grains. It's because of the processed flour, the processed and more calorie dense forms of carbohydrate, whether they be potato chips versus a great healthy whole potato that has been maligned, by the way, even by some in our community. That I'm like, believe me, a baked potato is not the problem. I'm not talking about the full fat sour cream and the cheddar cheese and the bacon bits. That's not a baked potato. That's a loaded whatever. Or French fries and potato chips. Now, if that's your non-negotiable, that's your 5% fun zone. That's a different story. 95% of the time, those type of carbohydrates aren't causing the problem. There's a calorie overload, a scenario that happens when you're dealing with processed. Yeah, temporarily, we can see blood sugar go up with whole fruit and beans and so forth. That's fine. But remember that if you're just measuring blood sugar, you're not measuring the other benefits that come along with it. And if you have to really pick between blood pressure, lipids, and blood glucose, and you really should just have all three, that the blood sugar may will catch up a bit if you're doing healthy carbohydrate, if you have type 2 diabetes, but your blood pressure and your cholesterol, the blood pressure in the United States, by the way, is getting worse. It's the biggest metabolic killer there is. And we are, I'm not saying disregard blood sugar, but we're kind of obsessed because of all these cool tools and measuring and these new drugs. And there's blood hypertension with all its generic medications, and it's boring. But blood pressure is a huge, massive issue. And those beans are going to help your blood pressure, they're going to help your cholesterol, and they're eventually, if not immediately, going to help you with blood sugar control. But if you want to see how much better they are than jelly beans, do a test. Try a cup of navy beans versus a cup of jelly beans. See which one gives you better blood sugar. But I'll grant it that maybe there is a temporarily with whole fruits and beans, those two food groups that are really consistently seen throughout blue zones, in someone that's been overloaded on processed calories may have a temporary issue with blood sugar. But by the time the physical activity starts happening, the natural, healthy, really side effective weight loss happens, that would be temporary. But if you're going to have to shift to something, well, look at your leafy greens, look at your cruciferous vegetables. That's all right. And eventually the carbs that you will want to build back in are things like legumes and whole fruits and particularly cooked whole grains because of that water content that helps you feel full and fewer calories. But even when you're shooting for crunch, and I don't get paid by the company, was it Food for Life that makes Ezekiel? I love Ezekiel. I'm by the way, I'm board certified breadaholic. Board certified. I tried to go 28 days without any bread. 30 days, a full month. I made it to the 28th day and I'm like, I can't take it anymore. I
Oh,
got to have
no.
I toast that Ezekiel. I can dip it in some hummus. It's really great. It may be bland because it's low sodium, but you dip it in something and look, you've got a great crunch and mouthfeel. So even in the more calorie-dense carbs that are less processed, you're getting more satiety and more healthy plant-based protein.
Right.
So I would say, I know if you're type 2 diabetic, you probably have some, like me, passion for carbohydrates. So you want to at least think if eventually where they're going to come back in, beans, whole fruits, and whole grains are going to be, are going to be part of your lifestyle.
What you just mentioned about, just looking at the glucose level alone, we really have to be careful about looking at one metric for health. And as you mentioned, if my glucose level is a little high, but my blood pressure is coming down and, other markers are getting better, we really need to look at the whole picture to say, am I really healthy? It's like, as an example, 50% of the individuals with a normal lipid profile still go on to develop cardiovascular disease, have heart attacks and strokes. Why is it? We really, that is not the only marker for cardiovascular disease. And we really need to look at the whole picture. And without doing really fancy blood tests, you can generally tell from someone's lifestyle and their behaviors whether or not they're going to develop heart disease, cancer, whatever else. So we really need to focus on the big picture there.
Oh, yeah.
There was another question here I wanted to look at.
While you look at it, you bring up such a great point. For instance, and I've seen this quite a bit, if you have two people with the same lipid level, but one has high blood pressure, that person has more of a cholesterol problem. I mean, in a sense, to simplify it, blood pressure literally can push LDL particles into the artery wall.
Right.
I mean, never have I seen, or the way that I've looked at at autopsy pictures, in someone who has cardiovascular disease and atherosclerosis, these cholesterol plaques that build up, you don't see them in the venous vasculature.
Right.
I mean, it sees the same amount of cholesterol, but the veins have low pressure. There's no pressure pushing lipids into the venous wall. You get into the arterial wall. So you're absolutely correct. And of course, we can measure a little bit more precisely and use LDL particle number. But even if you use LDL particle number over LDL cholesterol or ApoB, you still find that there are other factors, just like you said. That's one example. If your blood pressure is higher than someone else with the same cholesterol, the same LDL, you have more of an LDL problem because that pressure is pushing it into the wall.
Exactly. So. Yeah, and and I did mention all the advanced tests to look for endothelial dysfunction, which I actually use in my practice. But when you really look at where the problem lies, as you just mentioned, it's in the endothelial wall. So if you can figure out, are your arteries inflamed by whatever metrics you're using, whatever lifestyle behaviors you're using, I think you can really help people understand you have to get rid of that endothelial dysfunction. This is why I love the CHIP program. When we look at a complete health improvement program, we're looking at nutrition and exercise and sleep and stress and purposeful living and mental health. Similar to, I know what you're going to be writing about in your book. We look at the things that really make a difference, and the things that really make a difference are the lifestyle behaviors. It's really, it's amazing.
Absolutely. And the importance, I will say, of engaging in the discussion, in the diplomatic one with the family, because that social surrounding. I did notice, and I appreciate you asking, and thank you, Joe, for giving some tips on what is a healthy, crunchy snack that's not vegetable. I want to give you some tips from a crunch guy. That crunch is such an issue, and sometimes, frankly, wet crunch, like great slices of bell peppers or carrots, aren't what you're looking for, and I get it. You're probably talking about a dry, and in fact, Shar, you said dry. One of the cool things that I've used are just shredded wheat, and usually in context of something. If people put, for instance, those oyster crackers on salty soup, it's already salty soup. Why do you need salty oyster crackers? Just put some shredded wheat on top. You'll be surprised. Now, if you let it sit too long, they'll get soggy. But crunch-wise, they're great with hummus too, because if you like bread's fine. Look, I use the Ezekiel, but a lot of even whole grain breads are more processed, have high sodium. You can try some of those. Try shredded wheat. And I already mentioned I'm a big crunch fan. So for me, that toasted Ezekiel, that low sodium version, even whatever version, they all tend to have less sodium, but the low sodium one, if you're going to be dipping it or having it in the context of something that already is flavored up and you're just looking for the crunch, you have to admit, I'm sorry, Food for Life, but the only way I really like Ezekiel bread is if it's toasted. Sorry. Although it makes a great French toast, and that's the plant predominant side of me. I use egg whites for those. You don't have to do that. I'm just saying. You could do a great tofu scramble even, and you've got a nice crunchy piece of Ezekiel.
Right.
Even when I'm looking for garlic bread, I'll toast up that Ezekiel. I'll put just a touch. Now, I know some might be no oil. I will use a touch of extra virgin olive oil because remember, it's a 5% fun zone moment. And otherwise, I'd be getting some garlic bread from the pizza place. So put it in right. And then I just sprinkle some garlic powder on there and just a little bit splash of Morton's light salt. And I've got crunchy garlic bread. So I hope, Char, that...
No, that's great. That's great. Actually, I was going to answer him also. Have you ever tried just eating sweet potatoes raw, slice it up?
Oh, no. I should have sweet potatoes sliced up raw.
Yep. Yeah, I'll have a piece, like thin like that. Not like potato chip thin.
That's on my menu this week.
Yeah, I would definitely try it. It is actually a great crunchy. I usually will cut them up, put them in the refrigerator for a while so they're cold. And then with some hummus or something else like that, it's a great crunchy snack. So there's lots of things that we can recommend to people. We're almost out of time. What last words of wisdom and action items can you give the individuals that are on the line that they can start using today so that they can use obviously some of the knowledge that they might have gained today to really help themselves and their family, friends, and patients get on a healthier journey starting today?
I would say that we spent a good amount of time on food, and I would say my call to action would be what we're doing right now in terms of sitting less is to think about doing what Blue Zones would call natural movement. A natural movement I call being a NEAT freak. Now, NEAT, technically is non-exercise activity thermogenesis, but you and I both want to get rid of the gobbledygook. So I just said non-exercise activity time. Being a NEAT freak, everything you do, take calls walking, park a little further. Data is now getting clearer and clearer especially for blood sugar control, but even prevention, that just taking a mild 10 to 15 minute walk within 30 minutes of completing a meal, you'll have and exercise is great, but it will affect your blood sugar for that meal better than morning exercise, which may be good for blood pressure and your mood and your bones. I'm not saying pick one or the other, do both, but don't discount every little bit of movement. That data on Blue Zones that they have high volumes of light activity broken up throughout the day. Think outside the box. Any little bit counts. That would be the one thing I would add to this call to action.
Yeah, exercise after meals. That's great. Well, this is really exciting. We're just out of time. There's still some questions there. I'll try to answer some of them after we're off the air. But it's exciting to talk. I was talking to somebody recently about the value of these programs that you do, that I do, so many other people do. I think the ability to really spread knowledge, to listen to other people's concerns, their questions, their suggestions for how we can all stay healthier. And as you mentioned before, we're not only doing this for human health, we're doing this for planetary health. We're doing this for the health of the animals, for people that are concerned in that regard. So, I really appreciate what you do. You are such a great champion for healthy living. I love the name of your company, Reality Meets Science, because we really have to stick to that foundation. So I really want to thank you for really just, devoting your life and your personal time to helping other people. And it's really amazing.
Thank you, Dr. Sal. It's been an honor to be here, and I really appreciate that. If someone is thinking about it, you have an opportunity to join my master class. It's in the offer section.
Actually, let's talk about that for a second. If we click on the offers, just tell us a little bit about the two offers that are there.
Well, especially the master class, it is a way for people to connect with me. I put together 14 hours of content covering all the 5 keys and a medical module to help people understand their cholesterol test, how to check a blood pressure correctly. And then we go into the 5 keys: psychology, nutrition, physical activity, environments, and accountability. And they also get to have that access for a year. We ask people to try to do an hour a week to complete it within 3 months. Some people have binged it and done it in 2 weeks, watching an hour a day. But you also get to be part of my private Facebook community where I answer questions, Facebook Live, to that alumni and students once a week. So it's a really nice way for me to connect with many people And if people want to work with me one-on-one, I'm absolutely open to it. Obviously, it's time and therefore is more investment, but we've kept the cost a very reasonable way to connect with a good number of people through the masterclass.
Right, exactly. And, being in this tribe is really so good for all of us. So for the people that are on the line, please get involved. If you want to contact me directly or contact Dr. Rifai directly, we're available. Thank you, Tom. Next week, we have a great show coming up with Dr. Shower. We're going to talk about the lifestyle medicine approach that she's been working on in Aspen, Colorado. This class and all the other programs that we do are actually archived, so people can go back and look at them again. But let me leave you with the last word before we say thanks to the people that are online. Last word's yours.
I will say, as they say in the Nicoya, Costa Rica, the Blue Zone, pura vida, pure life.
Very good. Well, thank you, Tom. Nice seeing you. Stay well, my friend.
Likewise, take care.
Thank you, everyone.